My name is Nathan Wilson. I'm 54 years old, and for the past 17 years, I devoted myself to Meridian Technologies, a mid-sized tech firm based in Columbus, Ontario. I wasn't flashy or political. I wasn't the guy cracking jokes in the break room or handing out business cards at every networking event. I was the one who made sure the systems worked day in, day out without fail. When I first joined Meridian, we had fewer than 30 employees. Servers were set up in a closet, and I built our infrastructure almost from scratch. Over the years, the company grew. So did our systems, our networks, our storage demands, and the expectations placed on my shoulders. I was never one to complain. I stayed late. I took calls on weekends. I trained every new IT hire who walked through the door. I didn't ask for much, just respect, stability, and the quiet assumption that my loyalty mattered. Turns out I was wrong. It was a Tuesday. I arrived at the office around 7:30 a.m. Like usual, brewed myself a mug of dark roast and checked the overnight server reports. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then just before 9, an email popped up from HR. Nathan, please report to the director's office at 9:15 a.m. No subject line, no explanation. I walked in to find Daniel, my direct supervisor, seated beside Vanessa from HR. Neither one smiled. Daniel cleared his throat and got straight to the point. Nathan, after reviewing our operational needs and considering departmental restructuring, we've decided to eliminate your position effective immediately. Today will be your last day. That was it. No warning, no thank you, no acknowledgement of nearly 2 decades of service. I sat there stunned, not because I didn't see it coming, but because they didn't even bother to pretend it was personal. I nodded once and said, "I see." Then I left the room without another word. Back in my office, I packed quietly. A few framed photos, my wife and son on a camping trip near Algonquin, my dad's old watch, a cactus I'd kept alive since 2011. None of my younger coworkers came by to say goodbye. I don't blame them, they were probably told not to. Or maybe they just didn't know what to say. I was the old guy, the IT veteran who suddenly became invisible. And maybe they thought I'd just fade away. Go home, sulk, and start applying to jobs I was too experienced for. But what they didn't know is, I'm not just an IT guy. Over the years, I'd quietly built and maintained a separate archive of our internal documentation. Everything I had access to, everything I had a hand in setting up or reviewing, I kept a mirrored copy, encrypted and legal, with my name on the access logs. I had permission when I backed it up. At the time, I did it for redundancy, for accountability. But over the last 6 months, that archive became something more. See, around the end of last year, I noticed strange changes happening. My admin rights started getting restricted without notice. I was being excluded from meetings I used to run. A new guy, Jason Phillips, came in from out west, some digital transformation consultant with a slick haircut and a fancy title. He started poking around systems I'd built and managed for years. I knew what was happening. I was being phased out. But then I noticed something else. Access logs being altered, records being deleted from the shared drives, and system backups that mysteriously skipped certain folders. I don't want to throw around accusations, but what I saw didn't look like carelessness. It looked deliberate. So I started documenting. I kept logs of every system change I could trace. I archived emails, especially the ones management thought they deleted. I downloaded metadata from internal audits that never made it to official reports. I didn't hack anything. I didn't cross any legal lines. But I knew how to protect myself, and more importantly, I knew how to protect the truth. When they fired me, I didn't argue, I didn't threaten. But I also didn't walk away empty-handed. Outside, as I stepped into the cool spring air, I looked back at the office windows. Second floor west corner, that's where Jason sits. Right next to Daniel. Maybe they're in a meeting right now, patting each other on the back for cutting costs, making tough decisions, and bringing in fresh blood. But here's the thing, systems don't just work because they're built. They work because someone understands them. Every line of code, every patch, every bypass they thought was clever. That someone was me. They let me go like I was nothing. But I still have the records. I still know where the cracks are. And I know for a fact that if certain regulators saw what I've seen, Meridian Technologies would have more to worry about than a budget shortfall. I'm not vengeful, but I'm not naive either. I gave 17 years of my life to that place. And they tossed me aside without a second thought. Maybe they think I'm too old, too slow, too set in my ways. But they've underestimated me. And they're about to learn what happens when you burn a bridge with the guy who built the road. I didn't sleep that night. After getting home, I told my wife Diane everything. She sat there in silence, listening to every word. No tears, no shouting, just a long, heavy pause when I told her they walked me out like I was some liability. Then she reached across the table and held my hand. "You're not done," she said. And she was right. The next morning, I didn't open job boards. I didn't polish my resume. I poured myself a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and started reviewing the archive I'd taken home over the past few months. Every folder, every log, every timestamp. I didn't have revenge on my mind, I had clarity. This wasn't about anger. This was about principle. I gave Meridian Technologies 17 good years. In return, they treated me like a broken printer, replaceable, outdated, discarded. But what they didn't count on was that I'd spent those years not only building systems, but observing patterns. I knew where the shortcuts were buried, who approved what under the table, and who signed off without reading the fine print. Most of all, I knew what Meridian had to lose. Let me be clear, I'm not out to destroy anyone. But I won't be the scapegoat. They wanted me gone before the fiscal review. Fine. But if anything, they swept under the rug suddenly resurfaces, and fingers start pointing well. I'm making sure those fingers don't point at me. That's why I spent the next 2 weeks putting together a package, a secure time-stamped dossier containing internal reports, audit trails, email chains, software license discrepancies, and evidence of unreported data access. All factual. All legally obtained when I was an employee. No dramatics, just proof. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Evelyn Chang. Sharp, no nonsense, with a reputation in tech employment disputes. I didn't walk in looking to sue, I walked in wanting protection. I wanted to know where I stood and how to make sure the narrative stayed honest if Meridian decided to rewrite history. After reviewing the materials, she looked up and said something that stuck with me. "Nathan, this isn't just documentation, this is leverage." It wasn't about blackmail. It was about integrity. About setting the record straight before anyone tried to smear my name or blame me for gaps they created after phasing me out. Evelyn helped me write a letter, not to threaten, not to demand, but to remind them that I'm still here and I'm not blind. We sent it directly to Daniel and the company's legal team. Professional, respectful, and clear. As a long-serving employee of Meridian Technologies, I take pride in the work I've done and the systems I've built. In recent months, I became aware of potential irregularities that, if misunderstood or misrepresented, could result in legal and regulatory complications. While I have no intention of initiating conflict, I retain a complete and time-stamped archive of my work and communications, and reserve the right to protect my professional reputation should questions arise regarding events during or after my tenure. No accusations, just facts. 2 days later, I received an email from the VP of Operations. Not Daniel, not Jason, someone higher. She requested a call to clarify past procedural issues and thanked me for my continued professionalism. I didn't bite. I let Evelyn handle it. We offered written responses only, everything documented. And then something strange happened. 3 of my former co-workers reached out, quietly, off the record. One of them, Julia, a systems analyst I used to mentor, said things had changed rapidly after I left. Projects were stalled. Jason had started blaming legacy errors for delays in system upgrades, errors that were never there when I left. Another, Rahul, said someone in management was asking for access to deleted email logs, the very ones I'd backed up. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trying to erase me, they were trying to pin things on me, but they were sloppy. They didn't expect me to have kept the receipts. I didn't go public. I didn't leak anything. But I did take one step further. I sent a sealed copy of my dossier to a secure third-party legal escrow service. A simple clause: if anything happened to me professionally or legally tied to Meridian, the file would be released to appropriate industry regulators. Nothing personal, just due diligence. It wasn't vengeance, it was insurance. Now, a month later, I'm rebuilding. Not in fear, but with purpose. I've started consulting part-time for smaller firms that actually value experience over buzzwords. I've had a few calls with cybersecurity firms looking for someone who knows infrastructure from the inside. And for the first time in a while, I sleep through the night. I'm not bitter, I'm aware. There's a difference. Meridian made their move. They thought I'd vanish quietly, but I'm not wired that way. I didn't burn bridges, I built an archive. And sometimes the most powerful tool isn't what you say, it's what you've kept. It's funny how quickly people forget who you are until they're reminded. About 6 weeks after my quiet departure from Meridian, I got a LinkedIn message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Marc Dubois, a former VP at a competitor firm in Montreal. We crossed paths a decade ago during a joint project between our companies. He remembered me. Apparently, he'd heard rumblings that I was no longer at Meridian. "Your name's come up a few times," he wrote. "People are wondering what happened." I didn't reply right away. I let it sit. Because when people start wondering, it means someone's trying to rewrite the narrative and others are trying to get ahead of the truth. But I wasn't in any rush to speak. I've learned that silence, when intentional, can speak louder than denial. Instead, I kept doing what I do best: build, quietly, steadily. I took on a contract with a mid-sized healthcare tech startup. The work wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. They needed help stabilizing their infrastructure before scaling up. Within weeks, I found and fixed 3 data bottlenecks and restructured their cloud permissions to ensure compliance. They offered me a permanent role. I politely declined. I wasn't ready to commit to anyone, not yet. Then one morning, I got an email from Julia, the analyst from Meridian. She asked if we could meet. We had coffee at a quiet spot near downtown. She looked over her shoulder twice before she even sat down. "I'm not sure what you know," she said, "but things are falling apart." Apparently, Jason had been promoted hastily to cover for Daniel's strategic leave. A mismanaged migration led to massive delays in client deliverables. Some of the vendors I had long-standing relationships with had started pulling out. And as it turns out, the department's internal audit, one scheduled for the previous quarter, was now under external review. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just listened. Then she said something that stuck with me. "They keep saying you left because you couldn't adapt. But we all know that's not what happened." That hit me harder than anything Meridian ever did. Because for months I'd been trying to rationalize their betrayal. Was I too stuck in my ways? Had I missed a step somewhere? But here was someone from the inside. Someone who saw the whole picture, affirming what I already knew: I wasn't the weak link. I was the quiet anchor they'd undervalued. Before we parted, she slid a USB across the table. "You didn't ask for this, but you should see it." Later that evening, I opened it. It was a screen recording of an internal meeting, Jason briefing leadership about the delays. He blamed legacy frameworks, vague system dependencies, and even said verbatim, "Nathan built a fortress so tight no one knows how to get in anymore." That was all I needed. I didn't call a lawyer this time. I didn't send a letter. I made a simple decision. I published an article. Not a tell-all, not a rant. A piece on the cost of discarding legacy knowledge in modern tech transitions. A professional, articulate essay on the value of institutional memory, the importance of transition planning, and how seasoned engineers are often pushed out under the illusion of innovation. No names, no bitterness. But every word was rooted in my truth. Within days, it was shared across my network. People started reaching out, industry folks I hadn't heard from in years, younger engineers, thanking me for saying what they were too afraid to. Even some execs left quiet likes on the post. You could tell who knew. Then Mark reached out again. He offered me a consulting retainer, part-time, flexible, remote if needed. "You don't have to commit," he said. "Just be the guy in the room we call when things get too loud." I accepted. Not out of desperation, but out of principle. Because after being discarded like an old file folder, I'd found my place again, not in titles, not in politics, but in quiet influence, in credibility. Meridian never reached out again. They didn't need to. They'd already made their bed. But I made mine too, with clean sheets, solid foundations, and no secrets. Sometimes I still think about the day I was walked out. About the silence in the elevator. The look Jason gave me, not anger, not guilt, just assumption. He assumed I'd vanish. Fade. Accept it. What he forgot is that people like me don't need to shout to be heard. We just need time. And proof. And now I walk into rooms where my name still holds weight. Not because I fought back, but because I stood firm. They tried to write my ending, but I wasn't done writing. It was sometime in late October, one of those brittle Toronto mornings where the air is sharp and dry, and you're reminded that winter never really asks permission before arriving. I was heading into a strategy session with a fintech client when I saw the name on the agenda: Daniel Fraser, external advisor. For a split second, I thought it might be someone else. Fraser is a common enough name. But no, it was that Daniel. Funny how things come full circle when you're not even chasing them. I didn't flinch, didn't panic. I'd stopped carrying that weight months ago. But I'd be lying if I said my heart didn't give one clean, solid thump of surprise. The meeting was on the 23rd floor of a glass tower overlooking Bay Street. I arrived early, typical habit. I like to sit with the silence of a boardroom before the noise starts. 10 minutes in, Daniel walked in, briefcase in one hand, coffee in the other. He looked the same, only older in the ways stress doesn't bother to hide under eye creases, slightly thinner hair, a slower pace in the shoulders. He saw me, paused. "Nathan," he said with a polite nod. Didn't realize you were involved in this project. I am, I replied. I'm leading infrastructure consultation. We're reviewing your data consolidation model. There was a brief silence, the kind that would have made me uncomfortable last year. Not anymore. He sat down opposite me. We didn't acknowledge the elephant in the room. Not at first. The meeting moved along: introductions, deliverables, timeline issues. I stayed focused, asked the right questions, clarified points no one else thought to raise. That used to be my job, remember? The one they said I couldn't adapt to anymore. At one point, Daniel turned to me and said, "You've got a good read on this. They're lucky to have you." No smirk, no sarcasm, just a flat statement, almost like an apology disguised as fact. After the meeting, he lingered while others packed up. I closed my laptop slowly, giving him the window if he wanted it, and he took it. "Look," he said, "I'm not proud of how things went down at Meridian. There were pressures, politics. You know how it is." I met his gaze, calm, neutral. "I know how you handled it," I said, "and I've moved on from needing an explanation for it." He nodded. "Fair." Then he paused. "You know, things, they're never really recovered. Jason's out. There's been turnover. Clients lost confidence. Honestly, I think we underestimated how critical your framework was. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't need to." The fact that he brought it up unprompted said enough. Sometimes, I replied, the work speaks louder when you stop talking about it. That made him smile, not out of humor, but recognition. Before we parted, he said something I'll never forget. "People think longevity is about staying relevant, but I think it's about staying grounded. You always were." That night, I walked home instead of taking the streetcar. It was cold, but I didn't mind. I wasn't replaying the conversation. I wasn't angry or triumphant. I was just steady. Because here's the thing, they don't tell you when you hit a low point in your career. There will be a moment, maybe a year later, maybe 5, where you'll be face to face with the very people who doubted you. And in that moment, you'll realize you don't need them to validate your worth anymore. You already did that yourself. A week later, I got a follow-up email from the client's CEO. They were impressed with my insights, wanted to extend the contract. But more than the offer, it was the PS at the end that stuck with me. Also, Daniel spoke highly of you. Said you were the most grounded consultant he's worked with in a long time. I closed my laptop, made a cup of tea, and stared out the window for a bit. Downtown shimmered in that late autumn haze, gold light, sharp shadows. It felt like the city was quietly nodding at me. Not cheering, not applauding, just acknowledging. And that's all I ever needed. It was a gray morning in early December, the kind where the sky feels permanently stuck in neutral, and the streetcars splash more than they glide. I was sitting at my usual table at Pilot Coffee, halfway through my flat white inbox, open, but mind elsewhere, when an unexpected name popped into my email. Subject: reconnecting opportunity at Meridian. I didn't open it right away. Just stared at the sender line, Laura McAllister. She was now the interim CEO at Meridian, someone I'd worked with years ago in a different department, sharp, steady, no nonsense. One of the few I had respected in that place. The message was direct. They were entering a period of cultural and structural redefinition, and she wanted to know if I'd consider coming back, not to the same role, of course, but in a senior advisory capacity, helping reshape the very organization that once decided I didn't belong. I sat with it for a long time. It wasn't a bad offer. In fact, by any professional measure, it was flattering. They were offering autonomy, budget, executive access, the whole package. She even acknowledged without embellishment that the way I was let go was mishandled and regrettable. But here's the thing. I wasn't bitter anymore, and I didn't need closure. Because somewhere along the way, I'd built something of my own. Not just a consulting portfolio or a list of clients who respected me, but a rhythm, a freedom, a clarity that I never had at Meridian. Back then, I had to adapt to someone else's framework, someone else's pace. Now I was working on my own terms with people who came to the table, not out of hierarchy, but out of alignment. So I replied, politely, appreciatively, and I declined. "Laura, I'm grateful for the outreach and the sincerity behind your words. But I'm not in a place where going back, no matter how evolved the mandate, aligns with the direction I'm building toward. I do wish you and the team well as you reshape what's next. Best, Nathan." I hit send, finished my coffee, and walked to my next client meeting with a lightness I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. That afternoon, I sat with a small team of early career professionals, part of a mentorship group I'd started quietly 6 months earlier. We met monthly casually over coffee or takeout and talked about real stuff: burnout, navigating office politics, building credibility when you're still figuring out who you are. One of them, a sharp young guy named Zaid, asked me that day, "How do you know when you've made it?" I smiled. "You don't," I said. "Because making it isn't a destination. It's a series of choices, some loud, some quiet. The ones that pull you back to yourself, that's when you're getting it right. He nodded slowly, like that wasn't the answer he expected, but maybe the one he needed. After the session, I stayed back and watched them file out their voices trailing off down the hallway, laughing about some inside joke. I thought back to a younger version of me, hungry, uncertain, always trying to prove something. And I realized I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to old colleagues, not to new clients, not even to myself. I was simply living in a truth I had earned one steady step at a time. Sometimes the story doesn't end with a grand return or a dramatic redemption. Sometimes the most powerful ending is the quiet decision to keep walking your own path, even when the old doors swing wide open again. And on a cold Toronto evening, with the sky finally breaking into a soft orange over the skyline, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. Still grounded, still growing, still me.